I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast.
Ted Bundy is one of America's most vile serial killers and sexual predators. Ted was active in Washington, Utah, Oregon, Idaho, Colorado, and Florida. Ted has been connected to 36 victims, but investigators believe the number is probably closer to 50 to 100 people. This is our second part on Ted Bundy. If you haven't already, go check out our first part on Ted. We left off with Ted being accepted to the University of Utah for the fall of 1974. Liz was also really starting to obsess and doubt Ted. Ted is going to continue thinking he's the smartest person in the room. He does have an IQ of 136. For reference, 100 is average and 140 is considered a genius. Most organized serial killers have an IQ of over 113, so he really was smarter than other people around him. Except for Rodney Alcala. Rodney's IQ was 140.
This is also an interesting thought. Ted's grades were usually not that great, even with an IQ of 136, but it was probably due to all of, his energy that was going into plotting and murdering.
Yeah, think if he had actually applied himself to his schoolwork.
Yeah. Ted would pretend to be on crutches or have his arm in a sling. Sometimes he would say he needed help with a package or he was a police officer and a firefighter. Once at his car, Ted would ask the women to slide into the car to help him start it. The passenger seat in the Volkswagen Beetle was removed and some of the women fled, but unfortunately, at least 30 women did not flee. On September 2nd, 1974, Ted admitted to picking up an Idaho hitchhiker who has never been identified. He raped and strangled the woman, then returned the next day to photograph and dismember the body. Ugh.
Well, and it's so sad, right? Because somebody is out there missing her.
Yeah.
And she could have been hitchhiking from anywhere in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
No idea who this Jane Doe is.
Yeah. 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox is assumed to have been Ted's first Utah victim. Nancy was a junior in high school and had a part-time job as a waitress. When her boyfriend went to pick Nancy up for a date on Tuesday, October 1st, Nancy's father asked him to park on the street so the boyfriend's leaking car wasn't staining his driveway. Nancy's boyfriend became upset and he drove off without her. This caused Nancy and her father to get into an argument and she walked off, hoping to track down her boyfriend around 9 p.m. The police refused to look for Nancy for over a month because they felt she was a runaway. In hope of extending his life in 1989, Ted confessed to driving through Salt Lake City where he found Nancy walking up a dimly lit street. He kidnapped her and took her to an orchard located between two houses. Nancy was restrained, then taken to Ted's room in a shared house. She was kept at his apartment for 24 hours before Ted killed her. It's unclear how she died, just that a weapon was not used. It would be assumed that she was strangled like the other women. Ted was very disoriented in his 1989 interviews, and he really couldn't remember where her remains were. Ted directed law enforcement to Bullfrog Nottam Road for Nancy's remains, but after days of searching, her remains have never been found.
On October 18, 1974, Ted would abduct, rape, sodomize, and murder 17-year-old Melissa Smith. She would be kept alive for a week after her abduction. Melissa lived in Midvale, Utah, and was the daughter of a police chief. She was last seen leaving a pizza shop at 9:30 p.m. Her body would be found a week after her disappearance by deer hunters. And based on her stomach contents and decomposition, this means she was found almost right away. The only thing left with Melissa was a cross necklace. Ted spent the prior day, October 17th, hunting in Utah with Liz's father. Ted had called Liz multiple times on the 18th to discuss the hunting trip and how well it had gone. I would assume, based on the timeline here, that he had actually found a spot to take Melissa during that hunting trip.
This is diabolically disgusting. This is what makes me think his excuse that a force took him over for when he murdered is just like a ploy. He plotted a spot to drop a body the day before when he was out on a hunting trip with his girlfriend's dad. It wasn't no damn force. It was all Ted.
It's definitely messed up because Melissa had been with him in his room that whole time.
Yeah. 17-year-old Laura Ann Aim would be the third victim in October 1974. She disappeared after leaving a Halloween party on October 31st. She had dropped out of high school and was staying with friends. It would be a month before her body was discovered on Thanksgiving Day in American Fork Canyon. According to the autopsy, Laura had been raped, beaten, and then strangled to death with a pair of nylons. Laura had several skull fractures from possibly a crowbar. It was also determined that Laura had been alive until approximately a week before her body was found due to minimal decomposition.
Like Sandy Weaver and Melissa Smith, Laura was naked except for a cross necklace that had been wrapped around her neck with the nylons. This is a large piece of evidence that Sandy Weaver was also murdered by Ted.
And this makes me think Ted almost targeted women with a cross necklace, doesn't it?
Or it was the 70s and there were just a lot of women out there with long, straight brunette hair parted down the middle with cross necklaces. But he's deliberately leaving the necklaces wrapped up in the nylons.
Yeah.
So there's no other clothes with these women. They're always naked.
Except for the necklaces. They're left on them.
Except for the necklaces. Yep.
Unknown to Ted, Liz would be interviewed by Detective Randy Hergesheimer of the Seattle Police. When asked if Ted had ever been violent, she told him about a time that Ted had hit her while she was drunk. On another occasion, he threatened to break her effing neck if she told anyone about the TV and stereo he had stolen. They also discussed Liz and Ted's sex life. In 1973, Ted had convinced Liz to try bondage on a couple of occasions, but she didn't like it, so they stopped. Hergesheimer took some of Liz's photos of Ted and showed them to a witness. The witness was unable to identify Ted, and the police filed him away as a suspect that had now been checked twice.
And this witness was one of the people who had been at Lake Sammamish that day. And they said, nope, doesn't look like that, Ted. And so the police just kind of wrote him off like, okay, look, we've now checked him twice. We need to move on with the investigation.
Which makes you wonder, was it just what he was wearing maybe in the photo? Was there a lot of judgment? Did people judge you based on the way you dressed? And like he was very dressed and prim-propered all the way up to his neck with those freaking
turtlenecks.
Yeah.
All the turtlenecks. I'm not sure they were judging him based on his clothes, but I think he was dressing a little bit nicer when he was going to pick these women up. But I think he's also always a sharp-dressed guy. Because the investigators really do hone in on the shoes that they thought he might have been wearing, like that the Ted was wearing. And Liz would say, like, no, he doesn't own those shoes. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, he actually did. He was just wearing them when he was going to attack these women.
They gathered footprints there, right?
I don't know that they gathered footprints at Lake Sammamish, but they do later on.
Okay. Ann Roll, who was Ted's crisis center coworker, had also reported Ted in December 1973. One of Ted's coworkers and a professor had reported Ted to the Seattle police in the summer of 74 as well.
So now there's at least 4 people that have come forward later that we know of that have reported Ted Bundy as the Ted.
Turtleneck Ted, here you go. Actually, I'm surprised that he wasn't called that. Come on. An opportunity missed, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you. My husband is not the turtleneck type.
Oh my gosh, I am not either. I hate turtlenecks.
Just the like claustrophobia of it around your neck even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm bothered by necklaces too. Like I'll wear a necklace, but those people that like layer their necklaces, I was just telling my daughter about this the other day. They just layer on necklaces different like lengths.
Different lengths, yeah. The 14-inch, the 16-inch, the 18-inch. Yeah.
No, I can't do that.
I feel like they'd get all knotted up. I'm just not that classy.
Mm-hmm.
Carol Derange would escape kidnapping on November 4th, 1974. After work, she drove to Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. Carol had recently purchased a 1974 maroon Camaro that she was proud of. She loved that car, and she remembers the payments were between $63 and $67 a month. While in a bookstore, Ted approached Carol and identified himself as Officer Roseland. He said that someone had been trying to break into her Camaro, and he would like her to come identify the car and see if anything was stolen. They walked to her car together, and she looked in the car, confirmed that nothing was stolen. Ted was dressed in plain clothes, but he read off her plate number and even flashed a badge, so Carol agreed to go with him to the police station and climbed in his car. She assumed he was working undercover based on the plain clothes and unmarked car. Later, Carol would say,
I probably was trying to be nice, I was trying to do the right thing, and I was trying to be a good person. He was an authority figure.
Instead of driving toward the police station, Ted took a side road and ended up at an elementary school. Carol had grown up in Murray, and she knew right away that this was not the way to the police department, but Ted wouldn't respond to her questions about where they were going. Once at the school, he managed to get a handcuff on one of Carol's wrists, but she fought back before he could get on the second handcuff. Ted pulled a gun and threatened to shoot her in the head.
I remember thinking, my parents are never going to know what happened to me. I might have never been found. That was my feeling to fight, and I just had to get away with all my strength.
She managed to get the passenger door open, but Ted came after her with a crowbar in his hand. They struggled until an oncoming car driven by Wilbur and Mary Walsh happened to come up the roadway. Carol launched into their back seat, and they quickly drove away, saving Carol's life. Carol still had the handcuff on one wrist.
I questioned Carol launching into the back seat. I was thinking, well, was the vehicle moving and she launched herself in the back seat? Like how? Like through the window?
Well, she literally jumps in front of the car, and Mary, from Mary and Wilbur's perspective, they were like, oh my gosh. So they tried to lock the door. Carol was so fast that she actually opened up the back door and jumps in their car and basically just spills what happened, and they lock the doors with Ted on the outside and drive away.
Okay.
But Mary Walsh would later say, like, this woman jumped in front of our car. We didn't know what was happening. And she was suddenly in our car before I could even lock the doors.
At least they trusted her, and kept on going.
Yeah.
Anybody could have been like, get the hell out of my car. Who are you?
Yeah. And today's day and age, like, I know my car, it locks automatically, right? So she wouldn't have been able to even get in, which is a good safety feature for me and my family in the car. But what if they had driven away without her? She would have died.
Yeah. I guess you can sense also the terror in people's faces. She was terrified of Ted at that moment.
And she had a handcuff on her, on one wrist. So I think that's a dead giveaway. Any young woman that launches themselves at you and has a handcuff on, I think you're going to be like, okay, something's not right here.
Exactly. Sadly, this wouldn't stop Ted from murdering on November 8th. 17-year-old Debbie Jean Kent attended a high school play with her parents that evening. She left at intermission to pick up her brother from the ice rink and was never seen again. The evidence police had to go on was the fact that a handcuff key was dropped in the parking lot, and that key matched the handcuffs on Carol Durant.
Excellent police work. That's like a 1 in a million find.
Absolutely. Ted would admit to kidnapping Debbie, keeping her alive for some time within 24 hours, and then murdering her in his 1989 confessions. Following his confession, police found dozens of bones in Fruit Heights, Utah. The only human bone found was a kneecap, which for some reason they gave to Debbie's family for closure. In 2015, detectives learned that her mother had the bone and sent it away for DNA testing, which did confirm the bone belonged to Debbie.
Her family kept that kneecap, over 25 years, not knowing. I'm blown away by that fact that they held on to that for 25 years, assuming that this was Debbie's, but not knowing it could have been a stranger's. And then for police to just be like, wait, you have the kneecap? Could we use that? I think there's a lot of that in this case of 3 times complete sets of remains are just lost.
Yeah.
And then they give a kneecap and nobody wrote that down.
Yeah. And Debbie's mom was like, I'm going to get this tested.
Mm-hmm.
It's been here for so many years. I'm going to send it off and see if it's my daughter's kneecap. Sure enough, it was, which thank God, she could have had another girl's kneecap.
Yep. It could have been another victim that, her family's waiting for answers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Liz and Molly planned to spend Christmas in Utah with her family and Ted. Liz was watching the Utah papers and saw the reports about Melissa Smith's murder and the attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRanch. Liz still didn't believe that the idea that the Ted and her Ted could possibly be the same person had been handled correctly by law enforcement. So she spoke to her church bishop about it, and he recommended that she contact the police again. So Liz contacts Detective Hergesheimer again, and he says that he'll contact the Utah task force. In the meantime, Liz becomes terrified that Ted will find out what she knows. So she calls her dad in the middle of the night and tells him that she thinks Ted might be the murderer. She breaks down the details for her dad, but he tells her that she needs to be certain before she reports it to the police department because it could ruin Ted's law career. Liz tells her dad that she's not 100% sure, and he refused to get involved. And that's it. They don't talk about it again for a long time. Liz and Molly would end up going to Utah like normal for Christmas. Being with Ted calmed Liz down and convinced her that she must have been mistaken.
Liz's father, he should have given her more support or even protection. That's his daughter. At this point, Liz's father would know that Ted murders animals, obviously, because they hunt together. He should have questioned Ted or brought something up, got the inside scoop, something. Do some civilian detective work here.
It seems like the men, and this is 1974, but the men around Liz just treat her like she's a hysterical woman. They just write her off time and time again. Detective Hergesheimer doesn't even get back to her for a long time, so she contacts Utah police herself about it. And everybody just kind of keeps putting her off. Her dad won't take her serious. And then she goes around Ted and he's super charming. And she's like, okay, this, I'm just being hysterical like everybody thinks I am. And she becomes convinced that she must have just been mistaken, that he's not that person.
From doing our research about this case, watching Liz, listening to Liz, we're getting more of a clearer view of what kind of person she was. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but to me, she seems like a person that can easily be walked over. People take advantage of her. And even to this day, seeing video interviews, it just seems she seems so fragile. And I could see that through the pictures of when she was younger as well. Mm-hmm. She was controlled.
I think she has a very passive personality type. And for someone like Ted, he wanted to be in control. He was the extrovert to her introvert, maybe. And so it was just very easy, I think, for people to be like, no, what you're saying doesn't make sense. Ted's a great guy. Drop it. Just let it go. And she was like, okay. I did my due diligence. I tried multiple times. How many times can I keep calling the police? How many times can I keep having these conversations? And these conversations weren't great for her anyways. She's so embarrassed to talk about sex. And the detectives are asking all of these super specific questions. And she's mortified. And she's putting herself all through this. And then no one believes her anyways.
When Ted and her first met, Liz could have discussed too much information about her life for Ted to get attached. If she maybe didn't, she could have been a victim of his. But they got closer, which brings us back to the fact that he knocked women out. Yep. He didn't want them to talk to him to get closer. It's just, we'll never know.
Yeah, I think it's easy to really write off Liz in this. We'll talk about later when Ted is arrested and how Liz acts then, and it's harder for me to justify her actions then. But back in 1974, she was really trying to do what was right.
On January 12, 1975, Ted would abduct and murder 23-year-old Karen Eileen Campbell. Karen was 2 days into her vacation with her fiancé, Raymond, and his 2 children. Raymond was attending a convention in Snowmass, Colorado. They returned to the Wildwood Inn Lodge around 6 p.m. for dinner. Karen went to grab a magazine from their second-floor hotel room. She chatted with other conference attendees in the elevator. After leaving the elevator, there was a small area of hallway, 50 feet from the elevator to her room. Karen didn't make it to her hotel room, and she was never seen again. After Karen did not return downstairs, Raymond attempted to get into the room, but Karen had the only key. The hotel staff helped Raymond get into their room, but there was no sign of Karen. Karen's remains would be found in a snowbank on February 17, 1975. She had been beaten to death with severe head trauma. There was evidence of rape, and based on the contents of her stomach, she had been killed 2 hours after her disappearance.
In the 1980 interview, speaking in third person, Ted would say that he lured Karen away by feigning an illness or a heart attack, and he asked her to get him to the hospital. Ted also hinted that he had been staying at a hotel or an inn in the area. Police had checked for anonymous names, and Ted's checked in the area, but they didn't look for rooms booked under multiple people, only single men. He described this as a defect in the police technique.
So this meant when he booked a room, he said he had someone with him in order to fly past the radar of getting caught.
Right.
What a sneaky turtleneck man.
Yep, and we don't know if he actually checked in under Ted or he used a fake name and then said, hey, me and my girlfriend are staying here. So they put down 2 guests and police didn't check for it. In March 1975, the remains of Linda Healy, Susan Rancourt, Kathy Parks, and Brenda Ball were located. The remains were less than 12 miles from the spot where Janice Ott and Denise Noslin had been found. On March 15th, Julie Cunningham would disappear without a trace. Julie was a clerk at a sporting goods store and a part-time ski instructor. Living in Vail, Colorado, Julie was 26 years old and had a string of bad luck with guys. She was looking for a husband, but unfortunately, she found a bunch of bums instead. The 15th was a Saturday, and she decided to head to a tavern a few blocks away to join her roommate. Julie never arrived at the tavern, and she wasn't at the apartment when her roommate arrived either. She would be reported missing on March 21st, and there's still an active missing person case with the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. In 1989, Ted said that he lured Julie to his car, pretending to be on crutches and asking for help carrying his ski boots. Once in the car, he knocked her unconscious and drove her 80 miles outside of Vail. He then raped and strangled Julie, leaving her body in a shallow grave in a high desert area with a circular drive and some large trees outside of Rife, Colorado.
Denise Oliverson had a fight with her husband on Sunday, April 6, 1975. She got on her yellow bicycle in Grand Junction, Colorado, and planned to bike to her parents' home. Denise never arrived at her parents' home, but they didn't know to expect her. She also didn't arrive home, but her husband thought she was at her parents' house. The following day, Denise's family discovered she was missing. They also found her bike and shoes under a bridge. In the days before his execution, Ted would confess to killing Denise and leaving her body in a river about 5 miles outside of Grand Junction. Denise's body has never been found, and there is still an active missing person case with the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. We'll leave the nameless links for both Julie and Denise in our episode notes.
On April 15th, Melanie Susie Cooley would go missing. It was assumed that Ted murdered Susie, but her body has never been found, and Ted did not admit to her murder. Susie was 18 years old and in high school. After classes finished for the day, classmates would see Susie hitchhiking near Nederland, Colorado. On May 2nd, her body was found by a road maintenance worker in Coal Creek Canyon. The coroner report found that Susie had been beaten with a large rock to her head, which caused her death. Her hands were still tied and a pillowcase was twisted around her neck. There were indications that Susie had been kept alive for several days before her murder.
12-year-old Lynette Culver disappeared on May 5th. Lynette was a 7th grader in junior high with a tendency to skip class. Ted confessed to Lynette's murder, saying that he had parked his Volkswagen Beetle outside of the junior high school in Idaho. He saw Lynette walking and lured her into his vehicle. Once inside the car, he took her to a Holiday Inn hotel where he raped her, then drowned her in the bathtub. Ted provided details of Lynette's personal life to investigators and told them her body was left in the Snake River. Her remains have never been found, and she would have been in her 60s today.
And here we show him changing his MO a little bit. This is the first time that we hear about Ted sitting outside of a school and then taking someone to a hotel where he rapes her and then drowns her. It's not his typical attack.
No. Do you maybe think that's because she was younger?
Maybe.
It's questionable.
Maybe also it had something to do with how far away he was from his house. He's living in Utah right now, and he's clear up in Idaho.
Yeah.
Unless he had been there for a while and staked it out, he's in an unknown area. A hotel probably would have been the closest place for him to go.
He knew stuff about her personal life, so he would have had to stake her out.
It's because she was rattling off to him in the car, and she was telling him things. Yeah.
Oh.
It's horrible, right?
That makes it worse. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ted spent the summer of 1975 working as a security guard. He was drinking more and more, and his law school grades were dropping. He would later tell Liz that he drove to Colorado as a chance to clear his head and think about what was going wrong in school. The distance from Salt Lake City to Aspen is like 6.5 hours. Liz had grown up in Utah. She should have known that distance. That's a long one-way drive just to clear your head.
For sure.
Gas receipts would be used later as evidence, and they also showed that he had an obsession with getting gas. That or his gas gauge didn't work, because 2 or 3 times a day, Ted would stop for gas, which told law enforcement his location as he went.
Ted didn't think of that with his IQ. Disappointing.
Nope. Carol Ann had stayed in contact with Ted, and in May, she flew with 2 other friends to Salt Lake City to visit. The friends slept on Ted's apartment floor and explored the Salt Lake City area. He treated them to candy, homemade dinners, and trips into the city.
I had a thought of something about the gas. Maybe he had an obsession with getting gas because he had OCD about his gauge. Always being
Has to be on full.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's a possibility.
That's definitely a possibility. I don't know why someone would stop for gas 2 or 3 times a day consistently. It's that, or like I said, his gas gauge just doesn't work. You're like, oh man, I've driven for 6 hours. Got to stop and get gas because that gauge says I'm always on full. They said it was just an obsession. Like he just had to have it, like you said, almost an OCD. He has to have it at a certain amount.
Susan Curtis was attending a conference at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, when she disappeared on June 27th. At just 15 years old, Susan had bicycled 50 miles from Bountiful, Utah, to attend a conference at the university. She attended a formal banquet that evening and walked the 1/4 mile back to the dormitory to brush her teeth. Law enforcement doesn't think Susan arrived at her dormitory because her toothbrush was still dry. Ted confessed in Susan's murder in 1989, saying that he buried her next to a roadway in Price, Utah, but her remains have never been located.
On July 1st, 24-year-old Shelley Robertson didn't show up for work in Golden, Colorado. She was a known hitchhiker and had been last seen the day before at a gas station with a wild-haired man driving an old pickup truck. Her body would be found on August 21st, approximately 5 foot inside of a mine. Due to advanced decomposition, the cause of death was undetermined. Police suspected that Julie Cunningham and Shelley's murders were connected. The area was searched for Julie's body, but without luck. A detective did interview Ted about Shelley's murder, but he simply said,
I don't want to talk about that.
He never does admit to murdering Shelley, but it's another death associated with Ted.
Hearing this makes me think, did Shelley test Ted somehow that made him question his ability to murder, or simply just questioning himself as a person? I really hope she did. She obviously made some sort of impact on him.
What makes you think that Shelley questioned him?
The fact that he didn't want to talk about it. He's confessing to all these other women's murders, but when it came to Shelley, he didn't want to talk about it. It's very possible that she challenged him in some way, and he didn't like it. So he doesn't want to go back there.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a good perspective on it. Ted had a Salt Lake City girlfriend, Leslie Knudsen, in July 1975. They dated through the summer, and after his arrest, Leslie would provide additional information about Ted's whereabouts.
This is all while Ted was still with Liz off and on.
Yep, he has many girlfriends on the side while he's still dating Liz.
In late July, Liz flew to Utah. They started to drink, and Liz confronted Ted about his stealing. She ended up giving him an ultimatum to stop stealing or lose her. The following day, they spent time with her family in Wyoming. On the drive back, Ted and Liz stopped at a scenic point. In The Phantom Prince, she described becoming very scared and having an ominous feeling after walking into the wooded area with Ted. Liz wanted to go back to the car, but in a hollow and flat tone, Ted said they should continue on. Liz followed her gut and hustled back to the car.
Let's be honest, this was another attempted murder situation.
For sure. Ignoring her instincts, Ted and Liz got engaged before she flew back to Seattle. They planned to get married around Christmas time. When they told Liz's parents, they were speechless, which upset Liz and Ted. I was thinking speechless, oh my gosh, that sort of speechless.
I think it's speechless we don't know what to say because we have nothing nice to say.
It was a stern look or a stern face, and they were just
this isn't good.
When Liz went back to Seattle, she put her notice in to quit after Christmas, and her boss told her she was making a mistake. It should have been a sign to Liz when both her friends and family didn't think it was a good idea.
Things finally start to fall apart for Ted at 2:30 a.m. on August 16th, 1975. Utah State Highway Patrol Sergeant Bob Hayward pulled up in front of his house when he saw a VW Beetle drive by. Bob knew which vehicles belonged on his street at 2 a.m., so he turned on his lights to read the VW's license plate. The Beetle's lights went out, and it suddenly took off at a high speed. After a bit of a chase and running a stop sign, Ted eventually slowed down and pulled into a gas station. Ted got out of the car and told Bob Hayward that he must be lost, but Bob wasn't buying it. Ted provided his ID, and when asked about what he was doing, Ted said that he had just seen the Towering Inferno at a drive-in and had gotten lost. Busted. Bob knew his town, and he knew the Towering Inferno wasn't playing at their drive-in. A search of Ted's car found that the passenger seat had been removed and was lying in the back seat. There were also 2 crowbars, a ski mask, an ice pick, and some rope and wire found initially in his car. Ted would be arrested for evading police.
Once at the station, a flashlight, gloves, handcuffs, torn strips of sheets, and a mask made of pantyhose would be found in the VW as well. Ted explained it as just junk from around his house.
Listen, officer, don't we all carry around pantyhose masks in our trunk? He tried to explain that he wore the pantyhose mask under his ski mask when he was out on the slopes.
Yeah, and what were the handcuffs for, Ted? Are you doing some sort of ski challenge while handcuffed too? My golly, the amount of excuses he pulled out of his ass. Just ridiculous.
The torn up strips of sheet? Why is that in your car?
What would you use that for? What would a normal person use that for?
I can't think of a single time there's been torn up sheets in the back of my car. Or 2 crowbars.
I mean, crowbars are more... I can see that, because...
You need multiples, though? Or you need one?
That's... I don't know. That's a personal question.
If you have pantyhose masks in the hatch of your vehicle, that's on you, I guess.
Detective Jerry Thompson met with Ted on August 16th and approved Ted bailing out of jail on the evading police charge. Ted's name stuck with Jerry, though, until he eventually figured out that Ted Bundy was submitted as a suspect by a woman in Seattle in December 1974. Jerry reviewed the reports for Carol DeRanch and Debbie Kent again.
On the next day, Liz would break off her engagement with Ted, but not because she knew about the Utah arrest. Liz had planned to spend August 16th with Ted's family. When she arrived at the family cabin, Louise started talking about a bicycle that Ted had given his younger brother the prior week. The family had to arrange getting the bike home on a plane from Salt Lake City, and it had been a hassle. There was no way that Ted had the money to buy a bike, and Liz knew that Ted had to have stolen it. In her ultimatum with Ted, he had chosen to continue stealing. That evening, she called Ted over and over, but he didn't answer the phone. She couldn't get a hold of him until the following evening. In a blowout fight, she broke up with Ted.
Ted would be charged with possession of burglary tools on August 21st. The police would also obtain a permission to search form for Ted's apartment. This is different from a search warrant because none of Ted's belongings could be taken by the police. With the search form, law enforcement would have to make a list of suspicious items and then review it with a judge.
During the search, they found a map of the ski region in Colorado with Wildwood Inn marked and a brochure for Bountiful Recreation Center. The Wildwood Inn brochure is where Karen Campbell had been staying. Bountiful, Utah is where Susan Curtis lived, but the conference she was at was also called the Bountiful Orchard Youth Conference. Ted said that a friend left the map to Colorado at his house, and he had never been to Colorado. He admitted that he had been to Bountiful, Utah, but felt someone else had left the brochure at his house. At the same time, Ted knew the police were closing in, so he got rid of the Polaroid photos he had taken of the women.
Ted's mugshot would be shown to Carol DeRonch and Jean Graham, the teacher who had seen a stranger before Debbie Kent disappeared. Very quickly, Jean identified Ted as the person she had seen. Carol was not sure until she was shown a copy of Ted's driver's license and selected him almost immediately. Also, in September, Liz ran into Ted's old landlady in a supermarket. The landlady told Liz that a lady detective from the King County Police had been by the house asking questions about Ted. Liz called the King County PD and was told that Hergesheimer was no longer in that department. The lady detective was Kathy McChesney, and working with her partner, Bob Keppel, they had taken over the case. Kathy asked if Liz had been in contact with Ted and filled Liz in on Ted's evading police arrest.
Liz continued working with investigators throughout the fall of 1975. She was also interviewed again, this time with detectives from Bountiful and Salt Lake City police departments. They would discuss the plaster of Paris and the crutches that Ted kept, how he would stay out in the night frequently, then nap during the day. He kept an Asian-style knife in Liz's glove box, but occasionally it was missing. Liz had also found a taped-up lug wrench under her car seat one time, but Ted said it was there for her protection. Ted frequently borrowed her car, also a VW Beetle, but hers was tan. After seeing the composite photo in July 1974, Liz had headed to the library. Based on her calendar, canceled checks that she had stolen from his house, and the library papers, Ted was never with her on the nights that the women had disappeared in Washington.
In late September 1975, Ted called Liz to say he was coming back to Seattle to sell his Volkswagen, providing the excuse that he was really broke and it was worth more money in Seattle than Salt Lake City. Liz called Kathy McChesney, who told Liz that she couldn't tell her what to do, but now was probably the time to let Ted know that she knew about the Utah arrest. When Liz called Ted back, she followed Kathy's advice and told Ted about her knowledge of his arrest. Ted explained it as speeding with trash in his car. He told Liz that he hadn't been evading police, just speeding. Liz admitted to speaking with the police, but Ted didn't badger her, and she just said she told the police what she knew. Ted told Liz that he would speak with Ann Rule about the investigation.
Interesting side note here, Ted did sell his Volkswagen to a young guy that had been an ex-classmate of Melissa Smith's. And this was completely without his knowledge. On September 17th, the car was seized by police and taken apart for evidence. Ted's car sits in the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, D.C. today.
Ted didn't know that the police seized his vehicle and took it apart for evidence.
He didn't know that the person that he sold it to was an ex-classmate of Melissa's. It just is one of those, like, it's such a small world type situations.
Who wants to do a road trip to the National Museum of Crime and Punishment? Let's do it.
I do, for sure. I did not know this was a thing until I read about it being there. I was like, oh my gosh, road trip. DC's not that far.
I know. I'm always afraid to go to DC.
I've never been there. Have you been to DC?
I want to say yes. I can't really connect the dots together if I did actually go.
So you learned a lot at this field trip then. It's well worth your parents' money.
But yes, I would like to visit DC today. That would be awesome. We should go there.
Yes, we should.
Slap a corrupt podcast sticker on his vehicle. Slap it on there. Then we get arrested. And then
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure there'd be some charges filed against us.
Like, hey, do you listen to podcasts while they're handcuffing us? True crime all the time?
Yeah, I'm sure they are true crime all the time.
They're like, we're in a museum with Ted Bundy's car. We're trying to protect it. Yes, we like true crime. Okay, good. Well, here you go.
They probably get that all the time. Crazy people trying to touch his car or get in his car.
I can only imagine.
Ted called Anne out of the blue with a big request. He asked her to check with her contacts in the police to find out why they had subpoenaed his law records. Anne had not seen or heard from Ted since December 1973 at the Crisis Center Christmas party. He also didn't know that Anne had reported him to the police. Anne was upfront with Ted. She had contacts at the police, but they were for her job, and as a single mother, she couldn't risk losing her job. She agreed to call her police contact, but would have to tell them it was Ted asking for the info. Ted cheerfully agreed, and Anne said she would call him back. Kathy McChesney answered Anne's phone call at the Major Crimes Unit. After thinking about it, Kathy told Anne, "Tell him he's just one of 1,200 people being checked out, that it's a routine inquiry." Anne had been around enough crime investigations to know that the police were not issuing subpoenas for 1,200 people, and that something else was going on. She reported the message back to Ted, and he explained that he had been picked up and charged with possession of burglary tools, and those crazy police officers also seemed to be connecting him to the Washington missing women. Ted ended the phone call by telling Anne he would be in a lineup the following day in Utah. Ted did not mention why he was going to be in a lineup with Utah, and it didn't make sense if the police were looking at him for burglary in Utah and missing women in Washington.
That lineup didn't go well for Ted. He had cut his hair short, parted it down the side, and it completely changed his appearance. The police hustled to find other men that looked similar to Ted's new appearance, and they ended up using only other police officers in the lineup. Carol DeRanch picked Ted out of the lineup as her attacker. Jean Graham and Debbie Kent's friend, Jolyon Beck, also identified Ted as being in the auditorium on the day Debbie disappeared. Ted was arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault for his attack on Carol DeRanch in October 1975. He was held in the Salt Lake County Jail with a $100,000 bond.
Law enforcement in several states started to piece together that Ted Bundy might be involved in murders and disappearances in more than one state. In the first ever multi-state conference, investigators met in Aspen to review the possibility that Ted was involved in the disappearances in Utah, Washington, and Colorado. The following day, Ted sent a message to Anne telling her that he was all right and things would work out. They would exchange letters while Ted was in jail. In an October 8th letter,
"My world is a cage. How many men before me have written these same words, and how many have concluded that there are no satisfactory words to communicate their feelings except to cry. My God, I want my freedom."
Not a whole lot of pity for Ted here. It's hard to feel bad for his life in jail when he tortured so many young girls and women, sometimes keeping them alive to torture for a week.
Yep, not at all.
Nope. Anne would send Ted money for cigarettes and canteen. Just like Liz, Anne would feel responsible for Ted's arrest because she had reported him. Like everyone else, Anne thought Ted was a nice guy. She would continue writing letters to him, even after she found out he was guilty, because Ted needed someone.
These women, they just keep coming to him. They truly believed he was innocent. But he was the ultimate manipulator in making sure that they believed him. It's so sad.
It is. And they realize the truth later, but it wrecks just so many lives.
Liz's life spiraled out of control with Ted's arrest. She blamed herself, feeling that she had betrayed Ted, and that's how he ended up in jail. She spent her days drinking, some days until she passed out. Friends and family took care of 9-year-old Molly. Liz distanced herself from Ted, ignoring his letters until he called her in late October. She told him about her conversations with the police, but Ted told her it was okay. She only told the truth, and the truth would prove his innocence. Liz would eventually see a psychiatrist. In an attempt to protect herself, the psychiatrist recommended that she stop talking to the police and Ted. Liz sticks to this with the police, but not with Ted.
On November 20th, 1975, Ted would be freed on bail. Ted's mother and stepfather had raised the $15,000 needed. That's the equivalent of over $80,000 today. Just like Christmas 1974, Liz was terrified of Ted. She was so afraid of Ted's release that she asked detectives to notify her as soon as Ted entered Washington. But a couple of days after his release, Ted would be living in Liz's apartment. Liz and Ted had had a drunken heart-to-heart conversation, and she decided that she loved him and wanted to be with him. She was so drunk that night that she doesn't remember portions of the evening, and they had driven from one bar to another. Liz would defend her choice later, saying,
"If there was the slightest chance that he was innocent, I couldn't and wouldn't let go." At this point, Ted was under constant surveillance by both King County and Seattle police departments. He took Liz with him everywhere he went in Seattle, which made Liz really happy to spend the time with him. Typical to their relationship, though, Ted was using Liz as a way to deflect the police.
Being followed by the police wore on Ted, and he would attempt to throw them off his trail. Flying back and forth from Seattle to Salt Lake City, Ted would book the 7 a.m. flight, then try to lose the police tail the night before. The police would chase him all around town on those days. Frequently, Liz was in the car with Ted, and it started to become a dangerous situation for everyone. And I find myself asking, where was Molly for all of this? Hopefully not in that car.
Yeah, those were my exact thoughts. Ted took a lie detector test, but the results came back inconclusive. Ted's trial began on February 23, 1976. Ted waived the right to a jury trial because he felt that a judge would be able to see that the media had kept him from having a fair trial. Liz was on the list as possible prosecution witnesses, but according to Ted, she wouldn't be called because the prosecution felt she was a real squirrel.
Probably because she had contacted them, hyperfixated on her suspicions of him being the Ted, and then went back to dating him.
According to Ted, his defense team didn't want her to come to Utah because she could be called as a last-minute witness if she was in the area, so he asked her to stay in Seattle. Carol DeRanch took the stand for 2 hours while Ted stared at her intently. She went over the details of her attack.
Ted also took the stand and admitted to having lied to the police about what he was actually doing on the early morning of August 16th. Now his story was that he was actually smoking weed and had evaded police while attempting to air out the smell from his car. In the courtroom was Louis Smith, Melissa Smith's father, friends and family of Debbie Kent and Laura Aim.
After the witness statements were complete, Liz flew to Salt Lake City. Still, Ted asked Liz to not join him in the court the following day, so she stayed with her ex-sister-in-law that morning. Suddenly, Ted's lawyer called the house and said Ted wanted her at the court as soon as possible. She rushed to the courthouse and made it in time for final arguments on February 27th.
Since there wasn't a jury, the judge would take the weekend to make his decision. Ted was still free on bail, so he spent the weekend with Liz. On Saturday, they decided to get drunk, so they bought beer and wine. Then Liz took some Valium because alcohol wasn't taking the edge off anymore. Then she took more Valium, and they laid around watching movies. Liz did leave Ted for a little while on Sunday to have lunch with her family, but they were upset that she was sticking by Ted, and it was a short time before she was back with Ted again.
On Monday, March 1st, Ted was called back to the courtroom at 9 a.m. as a verdict had been reached. Louise and Johnny Bundy, along with Liz, went into the courtroom. Everyone was shocked when he had been found guilty. Ted would undergo a 90-day psychiatric evaluation prior to sentencing. In a letter to Liz, Ted said that the test came back showing that he was completely normal. But then in May, the psychiatrist advised Ted that he didn't have enough information to predict Ted's future behavior. The report also listed Ted as antisocial, passive-aggressive, insecure, hostile, and unable to handle stress.
I would say that he lied in that letter to Liz about his completely normal test.
Yeah, I would second that.
Ted would be sentenced to 1 to 15 years for second-degree aggravated kidnapping. Originally, Ted was charged with first-degree aggravated kidnapping, but the judge saw no prior criminal activity and lessened the sentence. This took life in prison off the tables. Ted told the judge,
"Someday, who knows when, 5 to 10 years in the future, when the time comes when I can leave, I suggest you ask yourself where we are, what's been accomplished, and was the sacrifice of my life worth it?"
Ted would serve his time in Utah State Prison. Liz felt the whole thing was her fault. She had called the police about his suspicious behavior, but they had turned Ted into a mass murderer and not listened to her when she said she had been wrong. Carol Ann was back in the picture, writing Ted letters by May 1976. Those letters became more and more intimate until she eventually became a visitor at the Utah State Prison.
Liz traveled to the Utah State Prison to visit Ted for the first time on September 1st. She had a hard time getting to see Ted because, as an unmarried man, the rule was that only one woman would be a visitor. Carol Ann was already the visitor. Liz eventually convinced the prison warden that she was only visiting for a week and she had known Ted since 1969. During the 2-hour visit, Ted hinted that he couldn't live in prison and something would have to change. Liz told him that she didn't want to know any of the details. They talked about Liz's new sobriety and her starting to date other men. Liz was supposed to meet up with Ted a couple days later, but sent him a message saying she wouldn't be able to. It had been too hard on her seeing him, and brought her struggle with alcoholism to the forefront again. Ted wrote a letter to Liz.
I would have liked to have said goodbye in person. Kiss you one last time. Sunday I sat on the bench in the prison yard, basking in the sun. The fear grew with each hour. What a pathetic creature I must have appeared to be. Watching, waiting. Then 3 o'clock arrived, and 3:15, 3:30, and 3:50, and finally 4. I waited until the bitter end. I imagined you driving to the airport and boarding a plane just a few miles away, and I was struck with the panic of a caged animal. It was possible for Ted to be paroled within 18 months, but the murder investigations would keep him in prison. The FBI had credit card slips putting Ted in the Aspen area at the same time as Karen Campbell's disappearance and murder. The FBI's criminologists found hair from Karen Campbell, Melissa Smith, and Carol DeRanch in Ted's VW Beetle. He would be charged with first-degree murder for the Colorado death of Karen Campbell in October 1976.
In a failed escape attempt, Ted was sentenced to 15 days in solitary confinement in the fall of 1976. Ted had been caught with a friend's Social Security card in his pocket. Then later that afternoon, his cell was searched and he was packed up and sent to isolation. Ted would sleep on a concrete slab with a thin mattress and have nothing to read or any communication with others for 15 days. This got Carol Ann all fired up, because she couldn't see him for over 2 weeks. After his time in solitary, Ted would spend the remainder of his time at Utah State Prison in maximum security.
Liz flew to Utah to spend Christmas with her family. With the knowledge that Ted would be extradited to Colorado, where it would be harder to see him, she decided to visit him again in prison. Ted wrote to Anne about the visit with Liz, saying they had a short and sweet visit, but seeing Liz was a glimpse of heaven.
On January 28, 1977, Ted was extradited to Aspen, Colorado to face trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. He was driven by car to the Pitkin County Jail. The jail would be reclassified as a short-term facility in March, which would require Ted to move to another jail. Ted would be moved to the Garfield County Jail on April 13th. This jail was located in Glenwood Springs, Colorado.
So he just went from maximum security to the county jail. Ted complained that Colorado was starving him, so Carol Ann sent care packages to the jail. He received items like cologne, protein powders, dried fruit, and love letters in these packages. They also had cringeworthy nicknames for each other. Carol Ann was My Beloved Boone, and Ted was Bunny.
Ick.
Yeah, excuse me out.
The preliminary hearing for the murder trial began in April. Ted planned to serve as his own defense attorney. After the preliminary hearing, Ted fired his public defenders. Since Ted was serving as his own attorney, he needed special accommodations. The judge agreed to a typewriter, a desk, uncensored use of the phone, and several trips a week to the law library at Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen.
This is like if you give a mouse a cookie. If you give a serial killer a chance to be his own defense attorney, he'll need access to the law library and a typewriter. Then he'll escape from jail.
Exactly. It was a small jail, and it took no time for Ted to befriend the deputies. In the spring, they let him walk down the river for exercise.
It's a far cry from that maximum security prison.
He's living the life.
In June, the judge ordered Ted to see a doctor due to his weight loss. Ted blamed the lack of food in jail, and for the first time in the jail's history, they started serving lunch. There was a hearing set for June 7th to discuss if the death penalty would be considered in Ted's trial. At 10:30 a.m., the judge ordered a break, and Ted went to the law library while waiting for the court to begin again. The law library was on the second floor with a window 25 feet off the ground. At the courthouse, everybody else kind of blamed each other for what happens next. Literally everybody else is like, oh, well, it wasn't my responsibility to watch Ted. It was your responsibility. And then no one was actually watching him. So Ted jumped from the window, that second floor window, and ran off. He hadn't been handcuffed, and he knew the area because of the walks around the river. A woman walking on the street watched him jump. She went into the courthouse and asked if it was normal for people to jump out of the windows. She had noticed him limping when he ran off. The impact with his right heel on the ground had left a 4-inch gouge in the ground. Ted had also dressed in multiple layers, stripping off his outer layer of clothes.
That boy heard the death penalty and he was out.
For a minute.
Some people thought it was funny that Ted had escaped. Shirts were sold that said, "Ted Bundy, you can bet your aspen on it," and "Ted lives on a Rocky Mountain high." There was also the Bundy cocktail made from tequila, rum, and 2 Mexican jumping beans. By June 10th, the FBI had joined the manhunt. The same day, Louise Bundy appeared on TV and begged Ted to come back.
Actor Kurt Russell would have his food stolen by Ted during his escape. Kurt had been camping with his friends. He sat down his plate of food and went to grab a beer. When Kurt came back, his entire plate was gone. After Ted was caught, he told investigators that he had survived by stealing food, including a plate of food from some campers. And I just thought this was the most amazing tidbit about Ted Bundy. This might be my favorite neat fact, is that Kurt Russell would have been a matter of feet away from Ted Bundy on the run. And apparently this happened to Kurt Russell, or has happened to him, multiple times.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the man does everything. He touches everything. He's in everything.
Yeah, he's got that vibe that things just happen to him.
And he's cool with it.
I know, right? Like he probably came back with his beer and was like, well, don't have my plate of food now. Like blame it on a bear or something. Like took off with the whole dang plate.
Hey, Tim, what you got over there? Can I have some?
Right. Anybody want to share their dinner with me? I love Kurt Russell. Overboard is one of my favorites. Also, The Thing. That was a solid movie as well.
Yeah, Overboard for sure, I remember. The movie Miracle, too. I think that was like a hockey movie.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one.
Yeah, it was like an old one. I believe it was a Disney movie. You know, some people may not know this, but he portrayed the voice of Elvis in Forrest Gump, but you never saw him.
So he's just a voice actor in it?
Yeah, but seriously, I mean, the man is a legend. I've seen him in Tron, Guardians of the Galaxy, Christmas Chronicles. He's everywhere.
He is. I love the Christmas Chronicles too.
I know, my daughter loves that movie.
Yes, it's a good one. And he's like rocking out in the jail cell.
Yeah. And his wife is in the second one, isn't she?
Yeah.
No,
Goldie
it's not
Hawn.
his wife. It's not his wife. They're not married.
They're not married? He's not married to Goldie Hawn?
No, they never got married.
Oh.
I don't really know
They've been
why.
together since Overboard, right? Like since the 80s.
Yes, they've been together forever, but they're not married.
Interesting.
They're still together. That's all that matters.
Yeah. Ted hadn't made it out of Picton County. After changing his clothes, he hiked over Aspen Mountain and headed south. He had maps with him that he had obtained as his own defense team to show the location of Karen Campbell's body. The weather didn't hold, and it would force him to break into an unoccupied cabin. There was a little food and a rifle in the cabin, so Ted had some supplies when he set out again on June 9th. He also broke into an RV to steal a parka and some more food.
What the heck is a parka?
It's one of those big heavy-duty jackets.
That's a parka?
It's a parka. Yeah.
Never heard that term.
No, we don't live in Colorado and go to ski lodges, so maybe we're the wrong type of people here.
I mean, you knew what a parka was. I didn't, so I don't think. Thanks for trying.
Sure, anytime. Ted would get lost and eventually circled back to Aspen. He found the same cabin days later, but the police had also found the cabin. Then, Ted stumbled upon a Cadillac that just happened to have its keys inside. He decided to drive back through Glenwood Springs on his way to freedom, but this would get him caught. At 2 a.m., deputies were patrolling the streets when they pulled over a suspected drunk driver for weaving all over the road. There was Ted Bundy behind the wheel. Ted had lost 20 pounds in those 6 days, and he was very disoriented.
You know, as smart as the man was, he wasn't very smart. Why go out at 2 a.m.? You'll stick out like a sore thumb. He was starving, so that probably had something to do with it.
And he had options here. Like, it was literally like, go left and go in an opposite direction, or go right and go right back where you just left. And he chose to go right.
Yeah.
And I think it was that mentality where he has to control everything, and he was going to like stick it to him like, haha, I drove through and you guys let me through, except it didn't work out for him. Like, go left, man. What are you doing?
Are you trying to prove a point, or are you trying to actually escape and continue on with your life?
You've been starving for 6 days.
Yeah.
Like, go left and find a McDonald's.
I feel like he would be a chicken nuggets guy.
Right. I don't care. First drive-through that you find, Ted. Get yourself something to eat, but go left.
No, don't go left. We need you to get caught and effing die in this thing.
Yeah. So he does go right. And luck had been on his side, really, with that yahoo who left their keys in the car with Ted Bundy on the loose. You don't want to be that guy that's like, yeah, that's my caddy. Oops.
Some people just trust their keys in their cars. I tell you.
No. This is also a good example of the good karma, bad karma situation that Ted talks about. He had been experiencing the good karma high when he found the keys in the Cadillac, but then his good karma ran out when the police caught him, and it went straight back to bad karma. That's in his mind how he explains this.
No, Ted, that's called the wrong choice. You went
right.
You went right when you should have gone left. Ted actually learned that Liz was dating another man, and while he was upset, he wasn't as upset as he would have been without Carol Ann in his life. Ted said that he had no regret about his escape and would do it again if the opportunity arose. Ted would be charged with escape, burglary, and theft, and he was to be handcuffed with leg irons during transportation. He did keep his law library access, typewriter, desk, and all of his other defense tools. The escape charges could add another 90 years to his jail time, in addition to the 1 to 15 kidnapping and possible murder charge. This is the end of our second part on Ted Bundy.
We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye.
Bye.